Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the, goodness me, 29th of December 2024. We have the usual opening gambit, the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find them in the description to the video below. 1,730 personnel loss is a massive number there. Again, huge personnel losses consistently every single day at the moment. 5 tanks, 11 troop-carrying AFVs, definitely down in both those categories, and 42 artillery systems is quite a significant uptick. So it could be just a random anomalous day where the Ukrainians have just so happened to have taken out a lot of artillery pieces. And 82 vehicles and fuel tanks is also a high number in that category as well. 2 pieces of special equipment. So a little bit here and there. Personnel losses are typically very high. Artillery and vehicles also lost at high numbers. If we look at the Andrew Perpetua loss list, we have high personnel losses that he has seen. 100%, that those people he has seen in those videos have died pretty much, and he's clocked those at 135, which is pretty high. But in terms of materiel, there is about a 1-to-1 loss ratio between Russian and Ukrainian losses. Combat asset losses, a little bit more on the Russian side actually than the Ukrainian side, with the Ukrainians having a few more civilian vehicles. Okay, let's look at the Ukrainian losses first. We have a few bits of artillery, nothing too much to shout about. If we look across the whole of the combat asset loss categories, all of these, there's about a 50-50 destroyed and abandoned to damage. That's not too bad a ratio there. We'll look at the Russians just now to see that actually the ratio is better for the Ukrainians. A lot more destroyed equipment there in those categories. So that's good for the Ukrainians. When we look at the tank losses, there are 5 tanks, 3 T-64s, and 2 Leopards. A Leopard 2A4 damaged with a night vision drone, and a Leopard 1A5 hit with an FPV drone. I had a segment on the Leopard 1A5 yesterday, a Forbes article from David Axe that looked at the Leopards that are coming online. They'll be the most numerous Western-provided tank fairly soon. We have an abandoned Bradley, a destroyed Bradley, and a damaged Bradley in the 4 infantry fighting vehicles, 3 of them being Bradleys. That's both, bad news for Ukraine in terms of losing those Bradleys or having them damaged, but actually does show that they are using the Bradleys that have been given. There are, John Oliver on my thread did a little bit of research yesterday, and I think there are Bradleys coming that were announced in an earlier package, but they're getting refurbished, anti-drone equipment I think being put on them, so they are due to receive some more Bradleys. I'm expecting another pledge of Bradleys before the 20th of January. I'm quite unsure why we haven't already seen them. I would have thought there'd be easy things to pledge, given that okay, you might need to refurbish them, do them up a bit, but you can easily say, well, we're going to give these and they'll eventually get there. It could be that they're not going to get to Ukraine for another 3, 4, 5 months, but pledging them now would be an easy way to use up the PDA. I would have thought there are enough Bradleys in storage to do that. Striker, we've got an abandoned Striker, 3 M113s, we've got damaged Striker, and we have a couple of Patria 6x6. Patria, they are, I forget which European country does them. APC. They were up for a what have I done there? Which country was looking at getting APCs in and put a bunch out to tender, and Patria have got it. I can't remember, but anyway, here we have the Patria, Swedish Army Patria there in the picture. Produced by the Finnish defence company Patria. I'm sure someone's just got a contract. Here we go. Too much to look at there. United States partook in the amphibious combat vehicle trials in the US. The Patria did. Lockheed Martin partnered with Patria, offering the AMV under the name Havoc, but ended cooperation with Patria and offered the vehicle to a different, so it didn't get to the US, but I'm fairly sure someone's just taken it on. Anywho, a couple of those have been lost there in Ukraine. In April 2023, Ukraine ordered 100 vehicles from the Polish production line. The vehicles will be paid by funds allocated by the EU and the USA. Later in an interview, Zelensky said there would be 200 vehicles, 100 now, 100 later. The deal would include mortar carriers. Interesting. Okay, so this might be one of those cases where this was announced a long time ago, didn't hear much about it, and then suddenly you see a couple of Patriots on a loss list that we hadn't seen previously. Quite incredible to see the number of abandoned vehicles hit by drones, and then night vision FPV drones being used as well. Vandal drones also featuring heavily for the Russians in how they take out some of these vehicles. A lot of Western kit, though, in the APCs, in the tanks, in the infantry fighting vehicles, and in the infantry mobility vehicles, a couple of Humvees, the usual MRAPs there, but mainly damaged, well, about 50-50, as I said. So that's what the Ukrainians have lost. Russians have lost. Interesting that we've got an oil tanker seized there, the Russian Eagle S. He's added that. Interesting. We've got an artillery piece D20, about 10 tanks here, most of them unknown tanks, but there is a destroyed T-90M. That's the newest Russian tank there. A lot of these unknown. So it makes you wonder, considering you can't tell what tanks these are, maybe the satellite imagery is too low resolution or less too fundamentally disassembled to know what they are. You'd wonder whether, there are that many more T-90Ms lost than it's been counted, or what tanks they comprise, these unknown ones. Right, infantry fighting vehicles, about 20 on the list here, so that's a pretty significant list, most of them destroyed and abandoned. BMP 1s, 2s and 3s. They are all BMPs in the IFV list there, so really high losses in that category. And then we have some MTLBs thrown in at the bottom there, after which we have civilian and ATVs, 3 quads and a golf buggy for good measure. So the Russians losing quite a lot of combat asset equipment there, and that is fairly typical, but consistent losses on a daily basis. Right, then we are seeing some footage, so I go to other kind of sources to see whether we are justified in believing that, for example, the Russians are taking heavy personnel casualties. Well, here we have a TikTok video of a morgue, of a military morgue, I think is it in Rostov? In Rostov here. And quite incredible, the number of bodies. Of course that's going to happen. Come on, Pearce, sort it out. It's been a long time since I've had a music issue, but there you go. So here, just huge numbers of bodies in these body bags, racked and stacked in this warehouse. This is just a warehouse of the dead. It goes to show that there are just vast casualties being lost by the Russians here. One would assume the Ukrainians are taking some pretty hefty casualties as well over the course of as ever the last few months, the whole war. But the Russians, my goodness, they are taking one heck of a beating in terms of personnel, and that's why you'll see, as I've suggested, that's why you'll see these North Koreans run at the Ukrainians up in Kursk. It'll be interesting to see if we ever see them fighting on the front lines down in Ukraine. Right, here we have some footage of a drone dropping thermite on a Russian position. We saw these quite a bit when they initially first came out, and then we didn't particularly see much of them, and now we're starting to see them yet again dropping that pretty horrific substance on positions there. So that's still happening. We have a Russian car blowing up in occupied Melitopol. According to local channels there, it's reported that the car belonged to the commander of the Russian troops there. He appropriated the car for personal needs, and it exploded. So there is some more sabotage, assassination going on down there in Melitopol. There has also been a spate of fireworks being used and other arson attacks. Firework arson continues to be a popular sport in Russia. This video comes from Galactica Mall in Shakhty. Police say they arrested a 57-year-old man who, surprise, surprise, is a victim of Ukrainian scammers. So he's done that in there. There was also yet another firework arson has been revealed in Russia. This one happened yesterday evening in Yoshka Ola. 62-year-old woman set a post office on fire. The police claim swindlers took $160,000 from her, promising to pay her back if she set off fireworks into post offices. It could well be that there are scammers doing this, and it's not just, a Russian excuse. We have seen, what else? I saw a petrol station pump set on fire yesterday. I'm not showing you this, but a woman walked in with a whole tub of liquid into what looked like just a small kind of corner shop or something, poured it all over the counters. It sparked off, set fire, huge fire in this shop, with the girl behind the till just running out. And yeah, as I say, a real spate of these Russia on fire attacks, that aren't cases of, careless smoker or big warehouse burning down, but these are much smaller, either fireworks set off in places. I say smaller, some of these are in the middle of malls or massive supermarkets, as we've just seen, but also just a number of smaller places getting set on fire. It's I don't know if I could call it an epidemic, but there seems to be a real uptick in that activity, and it could well be Ukrainian scapegoat scammers, something done on behalf of the Ukrainian government in trying to disrupt Russian society. But I don't know. I can't speak to the accuracy of those claims. They do come from the Russians, after all. Now, I only have one tab in the distance munitions, in the strikes section today. Overnight Shahid drone attack happened. Out of 10 launched, 9 were shot down, so 1 got through. And then 10 S-300 or S-400 ballistic missiles, probably up in Kharkiv, but I don't know. It might also be Zaporizhia or sometimes near Zaporizhia, like Nikopol, or it could be Dnipropetrovsk. These S-300s, S-400 surface-to-air missiles get shot relatively close to the front lines or to the border. But they did have a lot of these S-300, S-400 missiles. I remember early on in the war, there was an estimation they had sort of 8,000 of them still. You'd expect them, as I said before, actually, you'd expect them to use an awful lot of these, but then I guess they could also be worried about needing to use them for air defense as well. Okay, moving on. So nothing that we're hearing from the Ukrainians hitting Russia, and not too much from the Russian strikes either. Okay, Yoni Eskola here talks about the Kursk offensive and says, from overrated to underrated, the symbolism of Ukraine's Kursk operation goes well beyond its military significance. A year after Ukraine's unsuccessful summer offensive, it showed the world that front lines can shift and that Russia is vulnerable and can be defeated. When Ukraine launched its operation in August, it humiliated Russia and boosted Ukrainian morale. This came at a time when the world doubted Ukraine and overlooked its earlier successes following the failed summer counteroffensive. Much needed tea break. Ukraine demonstrated to the world its ability to plan operations while maintaining strong operational security. It can still surprise Russia and even its allies. I'm going to just expand on that point, because this was the importance of this attack into Kursk was that no one knew about it, not even allies. So they didn't tell the Americans purposely. They didn't tell other allies because they would be probably told not to do that. They went ahead and made the plans, but they were very lucky that there was all this talk about the Russians attacking down from Kursk into Sumy Oblast, and as a result, the Ukrainians were able to stack loads of what the Russians would have thought were defensive forces in the area, pretending that they were getting ready for a Russian attack, but actually they were readying themselves for a Ukrainian attack, and that allowed them to have a surprise attack. I don't know that they would be able to do that again. So even if they had the forces to commit to another huge offensive, I don't know whether they get away with doing a similar thing. And that's a real shame. Whether they do have the forces to do another offensive is another question. Now, nearly 5 months into the operation, Russia has still been unable to drive Ukrainians out of the region. This is quite pathetic, says Escola, especially considering how hard Russia has tried for months to achieve this. And actually, that's a really good point. The Ukrainians are losing a lot there now. The Russians are losing tremendous numbers, But many of the Russian casualties there are now North Koreans and don't really care about them. So as long as they attrit the Ukrainians to a critical level, that's okay by the Russians. So there's going to be a question as to whether the Ukrainians still maintain a foothold in Kursk or whether they pull back because of the attrition levels. Now, the land, as Escola continues, isn't particularly significant since Ukraine has no real territorial ambitions in the area. The symbolism of the operation and the message it conveyed to the world is far more crucial. Nevertheless, any territory Ukraine can retain serves as valuable leverage. So there is an intrinsic value to the territory in that it's leverage with Russia if they were to come to negotiations. There are some other claims to do with gas pipelines that run through Sudzha and other particularly important, like railway logistics as well, other important aspects to that land that they have taken that has upset the Russian, as I say, logistics in the area or hydrocarbon transit and so on and so forth. Despite some tactical successes at an unsustainable cost and the numerous challenges Ukraine faces, Russia's offensive in the east has failed to meet its objectives this year. Russia, so this is now moving on to other places. Russia remains stuck in Chasiv Yar, a location they were expected to capture months ago. So there were thoughts that it would fall in summer, and they are still fighting over it now. And obviously, we're almost into the next year. While they are making some progress, the human, material, and financial costs are unsustainable given the limited results. Meanwhile, Ukraine is struggling but holding strong. Potentially quite a positive outlook here for the Ukrainians. The claim that Ukraine's operation in Kursk failed to divert Russia's eastern offensive because the troops sent to Kursk came from elsewhere doesn't fully hold up. Those troops would have significantly aided Russia in other areas along the front. I absolutely agree with that. So one of the objectives was supposedly to draw troops away from other areas, and it did. That you will have noticed that Kharkiv has not changed for the Russians. They have not gained any more land. In fact, they've lost land in Kharkiv. Those two sectors that they have invaded into. And there were troops drawn from all across the front line to help in Kursk. It did draw troops away, and those troops would have been pitted against the Ukrainians along the rest of the front line. So the symbolism of forcing Russia to fight on its own soil nearly 3 years into full-scale invasion, along with Ukraine's ability to surprise with a successful offensive, far outweighs the significance of any extra villages Russia may have captured in the east. And this is something I was saying. Whether that's still the case right now, I guess is up for grabs. But certainly when they were going into Kursk and staying in there, it was, I think, a case that land in Kursk was worth much more than the land they were losing in the east. It's important to acknowledge that many of the challenges Ukraine encounters in the east and south stem from delayed and insufficient mobilization, training issues, command problems, inadequate fortifications, and importantly, a lack of sufficient support from allies. It's crucial to keep in mind that the indirect and far-reaching implications of the Kursk offensive operation, even on the overall war, and Russia's potential inability to outlast Ukraine may take considerable time to fully understand and evaluate. We won't have clarity for quite a while. If a suitable opportunity arises, Ukraine should consider replicating this operation elsewhere. I agree with that, especially before or during negotiations. Russia is adept at bluffing and often tries to appear stronger than it really is before talks. Ukraine can take a similar approach. Kursk may have begun as overrated, but is now underrated. While the full results are still unclear and we don't know how long Ukraine can maintain its gains, most of the positive outcomes have already been achieved and were worthwhile. I broadly agree with those points that were made there. So thanks to Joni Escola. Okay, Fabian Hoffman says he's posted a final subset. So you're going to get a lot of war analysts coming out with their yearly take, considering we're getting very close to the end of the year. His Substack is, at his Substack, missilematters.substack. In short, the final months of 2024 have highlighted that, like any war, the outcome will be determined at the strategic level. For both sides, the strategic outlook is not particularly promising, as each struggles to meet the war's demands, soon entering its fourth year. Given Russia's inability to expand its warfighting capacity, as evidenced by its inability to generate forces to effectively counter the Kursk incursion, Ukraine has a clear path to victory. Hold the line and outlast Russia. Easier said than done. Unfortunately, they can't do that alone. That's just a very short synopsis of a much larger article he has written. Now, Euromaidan Press reports that UN Representative Melnik has said that binding guarantees are essential for Ukraine, while NATO membership remains a long-term aspiration. The envoy says that Ukraine seeks binding security commitments from European partners beyond political declarations. In other words, what's being discussed by him here is that while NATO accession remains important for Ukraine, they understand that they're probably not going to get that, which is, for me, is really frustrating. But they're going to be trying really hard to get, I guess, bilateral security agreements with countries that would go further than previous ones, I presume, in putting troops on the ground in Ukraine in a kind of NATO 5 way. So if they can't have NATO Article 5, if they can't be part of NATO and have Article 5 protection, then they need a similar assurance from the allies that they are dealing with at the moment. So there you go. That's what they're going to be. What the Ukrainians are going to be working on. Okay, Tim White says, so much to keep tabs on right now. There is an awful lot going on. Finland continues investigating the Eagle S ship. So that's a ship that supposedly severed cables in the Baltic Sea and has been detained by the Finnish, suspected of damaging those seabed cables. But there have been 13 damaged cables in the Baltics in just over a year. This morning, 2 more of Russia's Shadow Fleet are in the same water. And in fact, people are tracking these. And there's one ship that keeps going up and down. Might be this one in that area there where it's red. There's another map I saw where it's just up and down, up and down. Russia is at war, says Jane Kiev. Jürgen Naudit says Russia is apparently planning to cut or damage cables in the Baltic Sea. Again, a ship of the Russian Shadow Fleet near the Finnish border is carrying out strange manoeuvres. A patrol ship of the Finnish Navy is sailing alongside this ship to immediately stop any provocations from the Russian Federation. Finally, close the Baltic Sea to Russian terrorists, says Naudit. I would broadly agree. I think we need to start getting properly harsh on Russia. Now, Zelensky sent condolences over the deadly South Korean plane crash. Just to let you know, I mean, it's not to do with the Ukraine war. However, 3 such incidents have happened in one morning. So some people are going, this is too much of a coincidence to be just a coincidence. There has to be some agency behind this. So what happened? Well, I won't show the video to you, but you can go and watch it, where you see the South Korean plane crash. Its landing gear, I think, was knackered and it went off the end of the runway. It might have taken an explosion, a bird hitting its engine. There is a video that suggests an explosion in the engine that is likely a bird hit, but we don't know. Anyway, that goes on the end of the runway. It didn't look like landing gear was down when I was watching it, and it just slides right along the runway and explodes off the runway at the end. And everyone on board but 2 people have died. I think it's the latest I've heard. So it's absolutely terrible crash. Horrific. But then we hear a plane made an emergency landing in Norway due to hydraulic failure. KLM Boeing 737 was flying Oslo to Amsterdam at an altitude of 1,500 meters. After landing, the plane rolled off the runway. It's a 3rd aviation incident this morning, says Flash News. And this other one here was horrific. This is out the window of a Canadian flight where, the engine is just, it seems to be on fire. In Canada, an Air Canada plane caught fire after an emergency landing due to a landing gear failure. So during the landing, the plane's wing struck the runway, causing fire. Actually, so that's not in the air. That is evidently as it's on the runway. None of the 73 people on board were injured. So that's a 3rd one. People wondering whether, there is a connection, but it could just be you counting the misses, you counting the hits and ignoring the misses. So there are ways that we can misinterpret data, and these sort of things might happen more often than we think. And it's just so happened that because that big one happened today, we're thinking, okay, you then look at all these other more minor incidences and add them together and think there's a pattern when there isn't, or there might be some agency behind that. So who knows? Right. just a random couple of things to end with. This one, due to climate change, winters in Ukraine can feel like a very extended November. In Ukraine's Carpathian Mountains, the land of the Hutsuls, where unique Christmas customs require cold weather, mud and rain are testing traditions like never before. So there's a real effect of climate change. Some people, traditions always change. Climate doesn't necessarily matter for change. It's called evolution. Yeah, that's not the point, mate. So the point is here that, you know, there is an effect. And it's quite interesting because for the last couple of winters, the weather was supposed to have it was supposed to be a lot colder, and that affected how the war progressed in each of those winters. And I think it's been interesting that we haven't had the properly cold winters that we were expecting, and it seems like we haven't yet had that this year either, and that could be an effect of climate change, or could just be anomalous. Right, and last and finally, this is a real and finally news piece. This is a Ukrainian artist has created a portrait of Alexander Usyk, who is the boxer, using Rubik's. Yes, of course, that was going to happen again. Using Rubik's cubes here. So he loads them up. He's got that picture, and he gets the correct front to the cube that he wants, and then creates this piece of art. And you know what? It's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to leave you with that. Thanks for watching. Not the busiest of news days today. There is a huge lot I need to share with you on the geopolitics front, because I didn't do it yesterday and there's more to add to it today. So that's going to be a hefty video, and there's hardly anything in the military aid. So it's just going to be a heavy geopolitics day today. I might even do 2 separate geopolitics videos. One I'll just do, I might do a separate one on what's going on with Elon Musk and immigration and the meltdown in the information spaces over in the United States, because that's been something to behold. But there you go. That's an incredible Rubik's Cube bit of art. Clever guy. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.